Alright, let's get Luna finished off, shall we? I will come to my layers panel, and I suppose I could use the highlights layer because it's a normal layer, but I'll create a new layer, and I'll call it whiskers, just for the sake of showing you something different. For this, I just want to put in these various fine bits of fur that you can see in the ears, also the whiskers themselves, because a cat without whiskers, nah, that's not right. Now, if I turn on my sketch layer, I do have one or two guidelines there. And for the brush, come to fur and hair, I've got DC watercolour whiskers. This brush was designed to do this job. My colour is the same as the background colour. My opacity is on 100%. Now for my brush sizes, I've got 7% and 3%. I'll start off with 7% for some of the bigger whiskers. Now for this, I'm not going to draw like this. I want to put my picture at an angle like this. Because if you're drawing whiskers or long curved lines like I'm about to do, I'm right-handed. You really want to use the natural curve that you get when you rest the heel of your palm on your iPad surface and you draw from there. You do a curve using your wrist. That is the most natural curve you've got because of the way the human body works. And so for this, I can see a whisker here and I'm going to draw quickly. Yeah, that'll do the job for me. See another one here. And you can see I'm turning around my iPad as I do this. And what else do I have? Yeah, you can see I've got some coming down and around, so upside down. Sometimes it can help to cross over. You see how I've crossed over those two curves? That makes it look just a little bit more random. Otherwise, things can get a little bit too well ordered. Now, what about the other side? I can see some here. I've got one here which kind of bends up and around. Also some that come down like this. You can see I'm drawing fast. That's the best way to do these. That's how you're going to get yourself a natural looking brush stroke. And looking at the picture, I've got some thick whiskers there. I also have some slightly thinner ones, so I'll come down to my 3% line, see what happens with that. Yeah, those thinner lines are really helping to sell this whole idea of a series of whiskers. I don't like the one I just did. Let's get rid of that. But I also want some of these thinner whiskers just here. Yeah, I can go with those. Where else do we have some? Oh, yes. You do get a few whiskers at the top of a cat's head. Let's undo those because I want to come here and I want to do these using, again, the natural curve of my wrist. A little bit on the other side. Oh, and definitely these ears. Because otherwise I've got something looking rather plain around here. I need some of these whiskers just in here. Let's take a look at the size as well. Make one or two bigger ones. And one or two smaller ones. I'm not going to try and match the amount of light coloured hairs I can see in my picture. I just want to suggest whiskers. And also I can see one or two there in the background. They're not strict curves, they're a little bit more haphazard. So I'm going to reduce my brush to about half opacity and make one or two slightly wobbly lines. Let's make my brush a bit bigger so you can see them just a little bit better. And no more than that, I don't think. Well, maybe just bunched up just in one or two areas. And what about the other one? Yes, I definitely need some coming out to the side. Let's come back up to full opacity. Put in some of the key ones. Nah, I want the natural curve of my wrist, don't I? There, that's better. Come down to 3%. Some thinner lines. Lower my opacity to get some different opacity lines so things aren't all the same intensity. One or two around here. And yeah, those are really starting to bring a bit of life to Luna. But one thing I am going to do now is come to my erase tool. I'm going to come to, well, I can come to general, just to come to nice build up. Opacity low, brush size set fairly small. And I'm just going to fade just the start of the whiskers, because otherwise they look a little bit too intense. Look, I'll come to this one here. If I just fade this in a little bit, now when I do that, those light coloured whiskers are starting to fade where they meet Luna's body. That's helping sell the idea that they're growing out of Luna's body rather than this harsh line that starts a little bit too suddenly. I want these to fade in. And in fact, I'm going to turn off my sketch so I can see more clearly what I'm doing. And yet, oh, what happened there? I got a rogue stroke. Did I do that when I was turning around? Let's undo a few times. No, that's there. That's stuck there. So 3-finger tap and opacity all the way up. Get rid of this. Come here, be a little bit careful around here. Yeah, that happens sometimes. And rather than undoing again and again and again until I lose half my work, I'll just do that. Then lower my opacity again, and again just blend the beginning of my whiskers into Luna a little bit more. Yeah, a little bit more around the top. Yeah, I want a few areas around here. And yeah, definitely around the whiskers on this side. A little bit around the bottom. And I'm going to close up my reference layer. And just with it zoomed out, I can just see 1 or 2 other areas where the beginnings of these white lines are a bit too sharp. So again, blend them in. And you can see really, really quickly and easily, I can get these kind of fine fur effects that would be so tricky to do with traditional watercolors. Basically, you'd get a fine rigger brush and you'd probably use some white gouache. Then you'd take a deep breath and hope you didn't mess the whole painting up when you did it. But this way, digitally, it's so much easier. So that is Luna. And on the way, we have covered a whole load of brushes and textures from the Drippy Cat Art Studio, but also, and very importantly, you've learned about workflow, when to do things, what order to do things in, which for digital painting is just as important as the brushes themselves. Now, there is just one final thing I'm going to do. I'm going to come to granulated medium. I'm going to add, insert a file. I'm going to come to overlays and marks, paper gray overlays, because towards the bottom, I have a series of files here called watercolor granulations. I'm going to load up, say, watercolor granulations 02. They're all A4 size, and interesting. But if I come to the layer, come on, I'll name it. To granulations, and I'll change the layer blend mode to overlay, and I'll leave it on max for now. And you can see I've got a very strong textured effect, which is, well, basically overpowering my picture by quite a bit. Look, if I turn it off, there's Luna partially buried under a sea of really rich texture. At the moment, it is overpowering. And just to show you that you can do it, if I come to my transform, I can make this bigger or smaller, and I think I prefer it bigger, but it's too much, it's too strong. Now I could just lower the opacity down to 0, but actually I like some of that texture in some areas, but not in others. So this is what I'm going to do. I will tap on my layer icon and I'm going to come to mask. We're going to use a layer mask. Now, I explain layer masks on the Solid Foundation course, and also I think on the Learn to Draw in the Digital Age course. Basically, that layer mask sits on top of the granulations layer, and where it's white, you see the granulations. But if I tap on it and come to invert, it's now black, which means that whole layer is invisible, except where I start to paint it white. So let's do that. What have I got? Let's come to General. Let's come to DC Nice Buildup. When you're working with layer masks, Procreate helps you out by giving you a white color or a black color. If it's white, I'm going to reveal those granulations by painting on the layer mask. If it's black, I'm going to conceal. At the moment, the whole thing is black. DC Nice Buildup is chosen. My brush size I want pretty large, and I want it to be pretty low opacity, say around 30%. Now let's come to, say, this bit just around the side of Luna, and I'll start to paint in. Can you see where I'm doing it? I'm gradually revealing those lovely granulating watercolor textures. These are real watercolors, by the way. I've got a whole load of granulating paint and created a few files like this. as I start to gradually reveal these textures, I'm getting some really interesting watercolor effects here. Don't want to go overboard with this. I've tended to avoid Luna. Let's just try one or two areas with Luna. I'll take my opacity up so I build things up. Let's come to the side of the cheek. And, well, that's interesting. Do I really want to keep that? No, I'm going to fade that out again by coming to undo. I'll take my opacity really low and add just a little bit of this watercolor texture just in the cheek area. I can afford to do it around the fur, and where there's granulating bits already, I can really go to town with that and build up textures. Maybe a little bit around the ears. Just to provide some nice, interesting texture just in certain areas, like say the shadow area. Yeah, I can do that. I'm avoiding areas around the eyes where there's a lot of finer detail because it might start to get in the way. Now, let's take a look at this. I'll make the granulating layer invisible for a second. All of a sudden, the whole picture looking a little bit less textured. Turn it on again. And all of a sudden, I'm getting a lot more interesting, but still natural watercolor effect. If I decide it's too strong, I make sure my layer mask is selected. You can tell that it's bright blue. Come to black. And just say in this area, just to the side of Luna, make a few brush strokes, and I can fade the texture in or out as much as I want. And you've got enough of these grey granulating layers to make your pictures look really textured in a watercolor way. Okay, I think I'll stop this tutorial now. There are other tutorials for the Drippy Cat Art Studio, and I'm planning on doing some more. Again, these will be on YouTube because already I've got so many videos for the Drippy Cat Art Studio explaining how to get the best out of it that you would have gigabytes of videos, and that will be way too much to download. But I can put things on YouTube, you can take a look at it, you can learn how to use the brushes, how to use the textures, how to use the guides, and how to get the best out of your investment. Okay? Stay tuned, subscribe, and look out for more tutorials about how to use the studio. I will see you then.